Hello everybody, and welcome back to another analysis with Ro. I'm your host, Ro, giving you the latest on everything when it comes to media, cartoons, books, and etc. Of course, we're still on Hunter x Hunter, and today it's a very special episode. We're going to be talking about a specific thing that also affects your host as well. So I guess this is a content warning. I may get upset. And of course, content warning because we will also be discussing the following topics, such as abuse. As you know, with the Zoldyx, that is a predisposition. That is a given. Along with probably certain other things, such as mental illnesses. Another disclaimer, me talking about specific characters with mental illnesses, especially those within the cluster Bs. I hope that I'm not vilifying anybody with those disorders. I will indicate very clearly that I am talking about those characters individually and how they handle those symptoms. This is not a critique of anybody else who has the following disorders that I may discuss within this episode. Now that we have those disclaimers out of the way, let's get it rolling. So, we already discussed and talked about all the aspects of Illumi's relationship with his fiance. Like, the relationship aspects are out of the way, and now it's time to explore a very invisible yet pervasive trauma called parentification. Now, the claws of this trauma are really sharp, and it is especially sharp for like older siblings within dysfunctional or just unstable households in general. So, fundamentalist families, homes with abuse or neglect, and immigrant households are all very good examples of houses that may exhibit this kind of behavior. So, in order to gain a very deep understanding of this trauma, we must first define it. So, right now, let's get into the definitions and everything else before we get into how this affects the character Illumi. So, first y'all gotta know, what is parentification? Well, parentification is best described as a phenomenon in which children take on caregiving responsibilities and then assume such a role for their parents, siblings, or other family members at the expense of their own developmental needs. Isn't that fun and dandy? So when children are given adult roles, they usually go through the process assuming functional and emotional duties and responsibilities that parents usually perform. So in other words, you kind of either step in or you completely replace your parent depending on the situation. So the parent then assumes the child's dependent role. So it's a role reversal, right? The parent becomes the dependent one in the parent-child relationship. It also has children provide caregiving for family members that exceed their capacity and developmental stage. So in other words, again, they're doing more so parental roles that are not appropriate for their age, which also touches into adultification, right? They're being placed into an adult role they don't need to be in. Speaking from personal experience yet again, it is not fun. Put it into simple summary. We're going to dive more into how exactly not fun this whole thing is. So parentification, it basically ranges in all kinds of ways, but parentification roles specifically are frequently associated with negative outcomes, such as denying children of age-appropriate opportunities, activities, and support. And research has also shown that parentification can potentially lead to insecure attachment. So back to what we talked about before, right? Especially within the relationship aspect of Illumi and kind of like him interacting interpersonally with his fiancée, right? And we talked about the insecure attachment of disorganized attachment, especially considering that the household that this character specifically was in is mostly due to mental illness as to why there is dysfunction within their Pacific house. Like their generational trauma has a lot to do with, of course, abuse, but mainly it comes from the mental illness aspect. So specifically with Illumi's dad most likely having NPD, also known as narcissistic personality disorder, along with his mom most likely having borderline personality disorder. And again, this isn't to villainize anybody that has those disorders. It's just that those two characters, first of all, untreated. So of course, it's showing like the worst of symptoms because it's untreated. Like these are individuals that did not treat those symptoms at all. It's just coming out of the woodworks with like the worst, right? Because it's unregulated. There's just no way to control it at all. So of course, having all that maladaptive symptoms kind of just in the home can create insecure attachment with the children that were raised in such an environment. Continuing on forward, how does parentification generally affect an individual? Is what we're going to be talking about right about now, actually. So, given that parentification, we already know it's a trauma. So, it's not shocking that this will cause a great deal of pain and strife in somebody's life already. So, whatever the cause, there's a lot of baggage and just heaviness attached to this strange alteration in somebody's childhood. So we're going to see what scars in this specific trauma it tends to just leave behind. Like, what are we dealing with? After all, these are not physical scars, right? They're mental. So it's harder to figure out if somebody's hurt if it's all inside, right? If we're talking physiologically, right? It's kind of hard to tell if somebody's like internally bleeding versus externally bleeding. Think about it like that, but it's all for your brain. Like, I didn't know, for example, off topic but on topic, with schizophrenia, the brain literally ends up with scars after an episode. Like, I didn't realize that. And it just goes to show you, like, psychological and physiological works together all the time. It's crazy. Back on topic, so we're going to talk more about the mental scars that follow somebody into adulthood. So, the first thing that tends to happen, very much so to parentified children, is that they don't gain an opportunity to understand who they truly are. And this is very important to indicate for this character, right? I think before I said like a sense of autonomy that is kind of altered. And this is exactly what I mean by that, right? The autonomy for this character is slanted, like heavily, like it's very much so skewed. And again, it's mainly due to being in a highly controlled environment. And for people that are like, okay, if that's the case, like if that were me, I would just straight up leave. Again, especially you also got to consider the racial aspect, which we also talked about before. It's kind of harder to leave as an immigrant kid. You know, as a kid that's a person of color, things get a little more complicated. I know. It's like, complicated? Oh, baby, complicated. You feel... Alright, let's get a little personal here, right? Let's use a personal anecdote from me. You feel guilty for leaving, right? Because you feel like, in a way, you haven't done enough for your parents. It's like, look at all of what they did. And look at me abandoning them. I'm such a bad kid, is the internal thought. So like, even if, right, you're a fully autonomous adult according to the world, to you, it feels like you did something wrong. God forbid you end up being the bad kid. You don't want to be in that place. And on top of that, if you're in the narcissistic household, being the bad kid could be a nightmare and a half. Because again, the scapegoat, which we'll talk about later, is made to be an example. In this case, the scapegoat being Alka. She's more so of an example of what happens when you make, in this case, the narcissistic parent especially angry when you're out of place. You don't ever want to be out of place. You want to stay in place. So you do everything you can to stay in place. When I tell you, this shit is just so messy. That's the only way to describe it. It really is that messy. So again, they don't gain an opportunity to learn who they truly are. Parentified kids, right? So some learn they're not fully capable of managing the responsibilities forced upon them. It's like, whoa, there's way too much responsibility on my plate right now. I am a literal child, but yet I have no other choice because, again, little does this kid know the reason, but we know, the outsiders know, the main reason for this is like, my parents are mentally incapable of taking care of kids. They do not want that mental burden. So they place it on the kid that they thought was the healthiest or like the best to handle the situation. It's typically the oldest. Typically. Some families are different. So I know there might be some people being like, well, I was the youngest and I dealt with this. Or I was the middle kid and I dealt with this. Every family's dynamic is different. But typically, it is the oldest. And the fundamental thing of it all, right, the end of it all, is that they feel they'll never be good enough. So, those are the main things to get at. They feel they'll never be good enough. There's too much on their plate. They're not fully capable of managing their responsibilities. How could you? You're a kid. Then these childhood emotional wounds, they often lead to adult feelings of anger, anxiety, and poor self-esteem. You always feel like you're doing a bad job at something that's not supposed to be your job in the first place. You're angry because this job was placed on you for whatever reason. With my reason, it was due to a familial divide. Like, I dealt with divorce. Like, I came from a divorced family. That's where I came from, personally. We're using personal anecdotes for a minute. With this character specifically, they came from, again, a narcissistic / a household in which there's a whole lot of mental illness in general. So I could imagine like the anger is times 10, because when eventually this oldest kid fully separates from this household and they truly sit down and process everything, because beforehand they couldn't process everything. They had to dissociate. We saw some examples of that dissociation. We saw moments of self-awareness. Like, for example, with the Hunter exam, he literally told Gon, it's like, you are going to be entering upon our world, essentially. Like, I know what that place is like. And at first, most people view it as just inherently negative. Like, oh my god, this character is trying to scare him. But it's like, no, I think this was really like, instead of it just being negative, it really was a warning, being like, I know the shit that goes on in that house. I don't like it. But I can't tell you, an outsider, that I don't like it. Like, you don't know what the fuck's going on in there. That shit scares me. I can't admit that, but like, just know that you might not make it out alive. I barely made it. And I lived there, like, my whole life. That's what I got. It's like, oh no, and again, it's mostly because of the flat tone. So everything else, it just swoops over people's heads. So I get it. It's mostly the tone being flat. But you move past the flat tone and you know what's actually being said. It's like, oh, you know, again, that anger, that resentment, which in this case is fairly reasonable. Like, we talked about the physical and emotional abuse that went on within this household. On top of that, being in a work environment that, let's be honest, no kid should be in. Like, if these parents were really about it and, you know, were for the most part safe and healthy parents, like, they could still, like, train and whatnot. Of course, maybe in a healthier way. I think plenty of, like, TV shows, again, like, and movies like Spy Kids, Incredibles, list goes on, where clearly they show, like, families who are either spies or superheroes, or list goes on, where it's like that kind of dynamic is there, but there's healthier ways to, like, train those kids, or there's healthier ways to handle that kind of situation, where it's just like you can train them up until they're a proper age, right? Or you could just straight up wait until adulthood. There were other ways, plenty of other ways. Like, when you really sit back and think about it, it's like, it didn't have to be this way. But to be fair to the parents, it's also mixed in with generational trauma, being like, well, this is always how things were. Why change anything? Because it's not, it may have worked at the beginning. There may have been good reason for it in the beginning of when this happened. But clearly in the modern age, it's not going to work anymore. You need to evolve. You need to adapt. Moving on from all of that, right, for a minute, along with the poor self-esteem and the anger and all this other emotion, another thing is the overall feeling of mistrust in peers and romantic relationships. And because of parentification, children who grew up with this kind of trauma, they continue to be caretakers into adulthood. Now, how we clearly see this is, of course, within the Zoldyck house, but maybe this is me making a connection here. Like I said before, especially in the beginning, we talked about this when basically analyzing kind of the timeline for Hizulu's relationship in the beginning. I discussed how there might be some issues that might come into place in the beginning of the relationship that would probably have to be, like, smoothed over. This might be one of them, right? Kind of that hypervigilance, as well as certain other traits that may take over, that essentially Illumi and his character may feel the need to be like, I'm responsible for other people's emotions. So this mixed in with a partner who has another cluster B disorder, this time most likely being ASPD. ASPD rage is different from narcissistic rage, but they are similar in the sense that it is also very explosive. But if there's one thing that you know that's the most common trait for all BPD, NPD, as well as ASPD, all of their kinds of anger, I'm not sure about histrionic, but all of their kinds of angers for the three disorders that I listed are very explosive. They are shocking and in and of itself can be traumatic. And basically when you have a character that for their whole lives was trying to appease that kind of person so they never get upset, that could be something that could be noticed in the beginning, right? Kind of those enabling, caretaking things, kind of just instilled in being like, it's going to be okay kind of thing, right? But it is in a way, and somebody described this to me, my therapist actually described this to me, it's like you trying to appease somebody else in that way is you trying to soothe your own stress and pain. So in a way, it's less about them being calm and more about like you know, having your emotions regulated, which is fair, right? Because it's a very chaotic situation to be in. You don't want to be stuck in a hard place, like a rock in a hard place. You know, you don't want to be stuck there. It's like you want to get out. So it's like, how do I get out? The fawn response, right? That's exactly what I was getting into. Kind of the fawn response is what you immediately go into. It's like, okay, in order to basically not have me be stressed out or this person stressed out anymore, I need to go into the fawn response, right? It's like, whatever it is, it has to be my fault. It's like, it has to be my fault. That's what it must be. But it's like, no, it's not, you know. And I think later on, there might have been conversations about that being like, you tend to do this all the time. This is clearly a problem that I see. Like, I get upset because of other things that 9 times out of 10 have nothing to do with you. You know, kind of like those conversations, which we've talked about a little bit with the Illumi's like relationship analysis with his fiance. But continuing onward, yeah, kind of this overall feeling, as well as kind of appeasing, is just the overall feeling of mistrust. So we talked about that as well with the insecure attachment of disorganized attachment, being like, I don't trust people, and I don't trust people, I don't trust myself. That's the mentality. So we see this again popping up, and the main reason as to why, along with like other types of abuse and trauma, one of the main things that could have manifested that disorganized attachment was probably parentification as well. So because of parentification, again, they end up being caretakers. They exhibit over-functioning. They exhibit perfectionism. Like, we see this with this character, like, kind of just dashing in and, like, you know, fixing, like, familiar problems. It's kind of what this character is known for, right? It's like, that's mainly where that behavior comes from. And catering to the needs of others while, you know, ignoring their own. Don't get me wrong, I kind of understood where some people might lean into the theory of, and I'm going to just bring this in, like it was more of a Twitter/Tumblr conversation, right? It's like, does this character also have borderline? I said no, and this was my main reason, right? Because it was clear to see that there were like reasonable indications as to where this behavior is coming from. That's not to say like people with borderline are never reasonable, but it's more like the smallest thing can trigger them versus like, to me, this seems like a powder keg that was ignited over time kind of thing. It did not seem like an immediate action. It seemed like everything that was kind of compressed down until it kind of hit the fan, you know? So if that's more so the case, now we're dealing with more so other kinds of trauma, such as like complex PTSD and parentification, along with other things. That's why I said no. I had a good reason for saying no. Moving on from basically that discussion, coming back into it, right? Performing perfectionism. And catering to the needs of others while again ignoring their own. So, since they experience this throughout most of their lives, parentified children may see these feelings as personality traits. I know I did. Again, personal call out. I know I did. For the longest time, it's like I was just trying to appease everyone in my family. And in some ways, you know, those behaviors still pop up every now and again. And I kind of have to learn how to forgive myself when it does happen. Because the thing is about like a lot of traumas, they never 100% go away. You just learn how to manage it better. But they never like go away. Like it still pops up on occasion. So there's that fun fact. It's just something that you kind of deal with. And since moving on back, and since they were unable to form a sense of identity, they may feel as if it's just who they are. Like, again, we see this with this character in a way, being like, well, this is just who I am. It's not. It's trauma. And I saw, like, earlier, I believe on social media, I don't know which site, but I saw, one person saying, it's like, yeah, come to find out, like, things I thought were my personality was just a bunch of trauma responses. Yeah, I had to learn that too, and it's like, it's always hard. Figuring out that you were essentially on survival mode. It's hard, but it's necessary because it eventually leads you to kind of sit down and think about everything that happened and eventually truly grow as the human that you were supposed to be, right? That kind of development of individuality has been, again, altered and shifted into something that's a little wonky. So the goal is to now stabilize it and get it to the right place. So that's always just an interesting discovery, but one that is, again, very necessary, especially with traumatized individuals. So in addition, there's also like some other psychological effects that can be attributed to parentification. So we're going to talk about what those specific psychological impacts are, and we're going to list them. So here are the following negative psychological impacts that a person can have, and it's all due to parentification. Shame. Shame is very much so, and we talked about this a little earlier in the episode. Shame. It's one of the key things that kind of drive this trauma, right? Being like, oh, if I don't do this for my family, things are going to hit the fan. Well, my parents are going to get upset at me. Things will fall apart. Like, if I don't do this, who will? It's supposed to be your parents. That's kind of what I'm getting to be upset about. Because it's like, wow, yeah, no. But there's just so much to be upset about. In my case, right? Yes, parents, but also just other circumstances that kind of made your parents that way. In my case, my parents were like both working parents. They couldn't be in the household even if they wanted to. They couldn't afford it. It's like somebody had to, pay the bills. But in turn, my childhood kind of got messed up a little bit. It's fine. And on top of that, things just got worse. Like the finances were already problem number uno. Like I was already being parentified due to that. On top of that, now we had like the separation / divorce. It just made things a lot worse, right? I'm talking personal anecdotes for a minute. When, shit just really hit the fan. And specifically with this character, right? The shame mostly comes from, dealing with a parent with borderline and seeing kind of like your parents splitting, because that's essentially what borderlines deal with. So like in this case, the parent that has borderline would be like the mom. Seeing the mom splitting, on top of that, also having to take care of a mom who is disabled. A lot of people do not highlight this, but I will. 9 times out of 10, Kikyo, at least without like the vision improvement with the glasses, without it, blind is bad. Blind is motherfucking bad. And I think it's most likely cataracts. So it got worse over time, right? Like when Kikyo probably first got married to Silva, I believe that she was like, quote unquote, fine, right? The cataracts weren't the absolute worst. She could, for the most part, see. Like things were okay. And then over time, things started to get cloudy with her vision, right? It started to get cloudier and cloudier until eventually, I don't know if it was cataracts or another thing that's due to radiation, but it was most likely some ailment, some illness to the eyes that causes great damage to your eyes. I think there was another one called glaucoma. There's a weird way of pronouncing it, but it was either that or cataracts that caused her to be blind so bad. And it was due to the radiation that was most likely in Meteor City. And again, this family, I would probably say that, again, normally when one discrimination's at play, there's multiple. So I have no doubt that 9 times out of 10, if they are classist, maybe on occasion race, along with a couple of other discriminations, they're also heavily patriarchal, and just all these things that basically is like, if you're not the quote-unquote perfect human, we're gonna kind of discard you. They already don't like her coming in for a multitude of reasons, and on top of that, she seems, not useful. Let's just put it that way. Not useful to them. And that's, again, a messed up way to look at a human, but it's like, that's how they view people. It's like, if you're not useful, you're useless. So we gotta throw you away. But like, Silva at first genuinely probably loved her. And it's like, no, we're gonna figure something out. But me personally, let me say this, okay? I guess this is kind of advice. If you find out that your family is not rocking with your spouse first and foremost, and you tried everything that you could, but it's like they're just still not rocking with it, honestly, I hate saying this because I don't like encouraging, separation from families. Like, if I wanted, I would be like, yeah, of course, try your best to like make sure that you are okay with your family. Like, family to me is very important. But sometimes the best idea is to separate. And honestly, that's probably what I'm the most angry at Silva at. Oh my fucking God. All of this shit, I'm gonna be so fucking for real with y'all. This is the part where it's like, I'm gonna get the most upset. It was preventable. I'm so sorry. I'm not absolving this man of any fucking blame. I'm not doing that. I'm just not. Like, this was so avoidable. Step away. That was literally the solution. Step away. You clearly love this person, as you claim. You notice that your family's feeling off and wonky, right? You should have pulled a Harry and Meghan. Basically, is what I'm saying. It's possible. He just chose not to do it. Because, again, he probably also is scared, but in my humble opinion, that's not an excuse. It's really not. It stops being an excuse when someone kind of hits their 40s. It kind of stops being an excuse at a certain point. And he wasn't in his 40s. I believe for his first kid, he was like in... around the same age as his first kid? We're talking now mid to late 20s. So, I don't know, man. It was insane. So, shame. Got on a little tangent for a minute, but yeah, shame, depression being the next one, which we will clearly see with this character. I think I'm not going to dismiss the depression part at all, especially with things like the speech in a monologue being like, you're going to feel empty inside, right? For me, it's like that was a mixture of dissociation and depression for sure, because it's like you're going to feel nothing there, but it's like you feel like this is your only purpose. It's like that's basically what that monologue was, and it's like that's sad. Because depression, again, is more than just sadness. It is sadness, but it's more than that. You feel like, again, this is really getting, again, to all my personal shit a little bit. You feel like a void. There's nothing there when you're depressed. You feel truly empty. And speaking of depression, on top of that is suicidal ideation. We'll talk more in detail about how this character kind of just has that behavior, but you just start losing it, man. You do. Excessive thoughts, and again, I've talked about this before with the mental health aspect of this character, right? The excessive thoughts were so much that it kind of spiraled into a psychotic episode, like the anxiety spiraled into a psychotic episode, which, by the way, is a thing that can happen. I did not know that. Again, before research, I was not aware that was a thing that your brain could do. The human brain is crazy. Suicidal thoughts, which, again, is what we've discussed. Suicidal ideation, thoughts, same thing. Social isolation. We kind of already saw how this character is kind of isolated, first of all, by his family, right? It's like the kids can't really interact with the outside world that much. But on top of that, not only just the actual physical process of isolation, but also the social isolation aspect, right? We kind of see that in the Hunter's Animal, as well as other things, kind of the separation from other people, being like, I don't want to interact. On top of that, adding on top of the neurodivergency aspect, being like, well, if I try or attempt to socialize with others, you'll see me as like weird as shit, essentially, and they will bully me, which is something that does happen for autistic individuals, slightly myself included, where it's like you feel like kind of the outsider. Like, people will make it known, even if they don't say it to you out loud, you don't belong kind of vibe. It's not fun. It's not. It sucks. Unrelenting worry and anxiety, which again kind of mixes in with the excessive thoughts. Like, you're thinking, oh, if I don't do this, that, and the third, then, my family's gonna fucking spiral. Those are the thoughts. These are the thoughts. Other internalizing symptoms such as psychosomatic. So again, this might mix in with like more so physiological, like your body starts aching and you start having all these like physical symptoms. But another key thing is kind of suppressing that and being like, no, it's fine. I can push through it. You're not fine. No, you're not. Right? We kind of saw this, hell, even going back to like how he handles like his needle pain and talking to his fiance, being like, well, it kind of hurts, but I still do it, type of thing. It's like, it hurts, but I'm still gonna do it. Like, okay, I can't judge because I do the same shit. Like, I, for example, to this day, still feel guilty for being sick. I hate being sick. Like, I feel guilty about being sick. Like, if I feel sick, it's the worst feeling in the world, because it's like, I feel like it's my fault and things are gonna hit the fan. Like, me being sick is gonna have attention drawn to me, and again, for a parentified kid, that is a nightmare, even though you're sick and you need to sit down and heal. Being a workaholic is, again, due to a lot of reasons, but for us, it's literally due to the fact it's like, we can't sit down. We can't. Bad things happen when we sit down. And if you have your bias kind of proven right in a way, like if something goes wrong, when you sit down, it would be like, see, I was right. Bad things always happen when I sit down. So you're always kind of on the move. It is simply insane. So along with those symptoms, there are definitely other ways that, trauma basically affects somebody. Such as when they feel as though they're never good enough for their parents, so they feel like a constant failure for other people as well as themselves. They also no longer discern their true selves. We talked about it. As well as, and it's mostly due to the fact that they were oppressed under the weight of parentification. So again, it feels like a heavy weight, like there's nothing else that you can do kind of thing. Like, people depend on you. Even at a young age, it's like people depend on you to make sure that everything in the household is fine. And the core identity has been suppressed by the demands of their very needy parents. So, as well as not being able to pinpoint their true feelings or emotions, Again, this mixed in with the neurodivergency of this specific character, like mixed in with alexithymia, like things really hit the fan. And they can't ask for what they need as they do not know what their own needs are. So like on top of the alexithymia not being able to truly process and understand the emotions properly, like even if they did, they would not indicate what their own needs are because it's been suppressed for that long. So on top of, kind of managing alexithymia and finding the language around that, now it's finding out what even are your needs, right? For this specific character, it's like, what are your needs? We'll get into more of the healing processes later on, but it's like, yeah, that's definitely a thing that needs to be further processed. So they're incapable of saying no, and they have no boundaries. We did discuss this previously in the mental health aspect, especially again on top of the aspect of neurodivergency coming into play. There's also the compulsion in their lives of tirelessly helping others. And again, we see this with this character all the time. I think it is the most obvious trait that everybody can see when they see this character. I don't think I have to point it out, even though I will later on anyways, but it's like, it's so obvious. A bird from the sky can tell you, yes, this is what's happening. Taking on the emotional load of those who are happy, more than happy, to take more than they would give. And I talked about this especially with the dynamic with Silver, right? I said like that shit is looking more linear when it's supposed to be reciprocal, which is circular, right? It's looking like a line, not a circle. That is the main complaint that I have. And that's exactly what I mean. Take more than give. Cause like emotional neglect / abuse, physical abuse. It's like, what positive dynamic are we really having? Money? Like between a parent and a child, that should not be the case. And mix the parent and the child along with like being kind of an abusive employer as well. It's like things are really hitting the fan here. The power dynamics are out of control. Out of control. So, and they often end up again in emotionally neglectful or abusive relationships or marriages. Do I think that's the case for this character? Technically no, but again, I'm not going to deny that there is a sense of unhealthiness, especially in the beginning, and it is mostly due to the mental illness aspect of that specific relationship that, this character currently has. So, with all that being said, now that we have defined parentification, we discussed some of the psychological and physiological effects, we're going to get into just when the specific trauma occurred for this character and developed for Illumi, as well as what type of parentification this character is experiencing, because there's two different types and we're going to talk about both. This character does experience both first and foremost. We're going to get into all of that right after this commercial break. So I'll see you guys in a minute. Welcome back, everybody. All right, now we are going to discuss how does parentification negatively affect this character. So now we've moved past how it negatively affects individuals in general. Now we're going to see how this applies to this character. We're going to see how everything that we talked about previously kind of manifests for this character, if you will. So let's get into the bread and butter of everything. Illumi's parentification most likely occurred after Hill was birthed. This is probably something that everyone kind of indicated, right? So before Killua's birth, right, with the first kid being Miliki, I'm not going to say the childhood was 100% normal, because obviously that's not the case, but things didn't really start. And again, this may seem like I'm blaming Killua. I'm not, because at the end of the day, it's the parents and the other elders in the house responsibility to make sure everything's regulated and sane. But as we know, again, parentification clearly took a hold due to the mental incapability of these parents. Like, they were mentally incapable, which just makes you sit and wonder and be like, it's untreated mental illness, which is why I say, first and foremost, especially if you have a mental illness, please get that shit regulated before you have kids. It will literally fucking be chaotic otherwise. Like, if you don't regulate your shit, your kids will be hurt. That's just the truth. And again, this is not to vilify anybody, because again, I also have a whole lot of mental illnesses, and I don't want children. But if I did, I would probably have a heavier amount of treatment. Like, I already go to therapy, but I would probably have a heavier amount of treatment, just in case. Not to make me like a perfect person or anything, because there's no such thing. But to clearly just make sure that the worst of symptoms doesn't come into play. Like, most of the symptoms that I have would hopefully be benign. Like, not as harmful. I digress. Again, little rant and rave. Let's get back on topic. So, with Miliki, the dynamic was probably somewhat normal. Like, a childhood. Clearly, they have a playground in the background. So, it's like, you know, clearly at first, with Silva and Kikyo, let me give some grace. Being like new parents, mistakes were made, you know, being a first kid, you're an experiment kid. Your parents normally don't know what the fuck they're doing as parents at all, right? Let's give that credence, that grace at first. So like, being the first kid, being the only child for a little bit, you know, you have, to be honest, a pretty normal childhood. Even with like the first kid, you know, like your parents are still there watching everything, because you might as well both be infants. Like, you're in the single digits, you know, and this baby is in months. So single digits, months. So like, your parents were smart enough to know that maybe let's not entrust the life of a literal infant, even though you shouldn't be entrusting the life of an infant to kids that are double digits. You could argue that, you know, a kid with double digits is less likely to harm your child. But single digits, it's like they might as well be an infant too, kind of thing, right? So it's like, you're both watching, you have this kid that's like 5, 6, you know, like little. And you have like your first, your first like younger sibling. I'm about to say older. My God. First younger sibling, right? And it's like you have that close bond with that younger sibling, even if they're an infant and you're like an itty bitty kid, right? It's like things are for the most part great, minus, again, the typical Zoldyck abuse, which is always looming over these kids' heads. That will unfortunately not leave. But other than that, it's like, you know, things are for the most part great. You have a close bond with the first younger sibling that you've ever had. Like, there's this new baby that comes into play. It's like, things are great. It's like your parents are more so paying attention to you, right? Especially because it's like, again, Killua hasn't come into play yet. Like, there is no quote-unquote perfect hire and golden child. That didn't happen yet. We have not had that dynamic of golden child. So everything seemed fine, right? And then, after Killua got born, that's when the Fire Nation attacked. Translation, that's where everything kind of went wrong. But I'm not trying to blame Killua, because again, what was with the favoritism, right? That was mostly due to like, I wanted a hire that best resembles the family, aka a hire that more so like looks like me and feeds into my narcissism. Again, golden child. That's where everything started to ignite. Things can't be perfect forever, especially when you have, again, an individual with NPD. Who knows what the beginning of like Kikyo and Silva's relationship looked like? Because the thing about NPD, it's like similar to other disorders. It's like there's certain times where your symptoms can just ignite and certain times where like things are mellow. So in the beginning, things were probably mellow. I don't know if it was love bombing or not. I haven't analyzed them or their relationship yet. So we'll probably figure that out later. But at least for the most part, for everybody, in the beginning, things were mellow. And then we started feeding the demons. As soon as Killua got born. I'm so sorry, Killua. It's not your fault. It's really not that baby's fault. I just wanted to indicate throughout this whole thing, it's really not that baby's fault. It's the parents. It's the other elders. If granddad, if Zeno really cared like that for real, which clearly we see him as also emotionally absent. It's like I'm starting to see where Silva gets it from. As another emotionally absent grandparent in this case, being like, I'm not involved. It's like, yes, you are, old man. Get your ass back here. I digress, right? Killua was born. That's when things started to come to the surface, right? And then when Illumi was specifically 12 years old, and the trauma just started to be triggered, specifically by like Silva's adultification of 12-year-old Illumi, right? Because again, adult-like roles, adult-like positions, being like, you'll do. And this was also on top of that, probably due to, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail, the deterioration of like Kikyo's health. I'm going to assume something a little insane, right? But I think it kind of makes sense. I think especially during Killua's birth, there may have been an indication of, as well as just being as blind as a bat, and, BPD. I'm not sure if this is the case. This I will probably have to go back and study, but there might be a predisposition of especially moms having BPD also developing perinatal illnesses. So in other words, like postpartum. There may have been a chance for that. And again, because this family expects things like ultimate perfection and just being the highest of the high, and, not being embarrassed by like any of their wives. And it's like, it's already enough that you come from this place and you're this kind of person. And now here you are displaying weakness in this way. Discard her. Again, Silva loving her, but not enough to leave. It's like, wait. I have a better idea. I have my oldest kid. Let them have all the caretaking roles, and maybe we might give her another kid or two. Let's see if she, is capable or not. And it's like they had Alaka, and then Alaka had the curse. Again, Grandpa hid shit and hid the fact that, I was a thing, because he was the one that went to the Dark Continent and brought, all the demons back into the house. And now, baby girl's out here being cursed and shit. It's like, now she half demon, half human. Fun. But Grandpa ain't gonna say that, and therefore all the blame is now gonna be on Alaka. It's like, she's the problem child. She's the blame. And again, scapegoating begins. It's a mess in this house. I swear. Oh, again, adult-like position. Silva places Illumi in it, especially after noticing his wife's health just deteriorating in general. And then, not wanting to shoulder the additional domestic responsibilities of raising Killua, so he just places it on to the oldest kid. Of course we gotta have weaponized incompetence in this bitch. Of course we do. Why not? just why not? Men, niggas, damn. My blood pressure's high. Let me calm myself. This man, just ignites all kinds of stress within me. So, passed it down to the person he thought was the most like his wife, but a healthier version. And I've kind of indicated that before, right? Where it's like the oldest kid is like, y'all do. My wife, aka your mom, is no longer fit for the role. She can play the role, right? Kind of like play pretend-ish. But you'll be the one actually taking care of the kids. Isn't that fun? No! No, the fuck it's not, man. No, it's not. It ain't fun. It ain't fun at all. What the hell? Damn, I'm mad. So again, knowing this as a notion implies that the main reasons for Illumi's parentification are the following, okay? Parental disability or chronic illness, family unpredictability and instability, and parents or siblings dealing with mental illness, in this case, parents/other elders. They don't know how to deal with their mental shit, so let's just put it on the children. It'll be fine. No, it won't be. God, I want to choke somebody. God damn. I'm upset. Again, this both also demonstrates that both emotional and logistical parentification were very much so present during Illumi's childhood. Now, for those of you asking, what the fuck? There's two different types of parentification? Yes. Let me explain those two right now. So, emotional parentification is the child's emotional and psychological needs are not satisfied, they're poorly recognized or ignored. Again, the literal, more so emotional aspect for it. So one of the things is intervening in marital conflicts or conflicts between caregivers. You're managing or serving as their therapist/confidant. You're becoming a surrogate spouse or significant other for a caregiver. You're taking responsibility for a caregiver's feelings, and you're serving as a scapegoat to keep peace within the family, right? So remember how I said last time with specifically talking about the familial roles and being the caretaker of the household. This is more so that aspect given even more detail, right? Especially considering that in this case, it seems like in a lot of ways, and we'll talk about it in more detail later on with this section, how like Illumi in a non-sexual, I have to indicate non-sexual way, seems to kind of be like replacing the role of his mom, you know? Hopefully non-sexual, because if that's not the case, I would be angry to the 10th fucking degree for obvious reasons. For the love of God, have it just be non. Like, no. Okay. Logistical parentification is another type that also has been demonstrated, which is when a child attempts to meet the physical needs of their caregivers or just family as a whole. So again, this is also what I've been talking about. Cooking, cleaning, grocery shopping, paying the bills, giving out medication, getting the siblings ready for school, etc., etc. You know, the literal physical things that your parent would do. So, not the same as assigning chores, because at the end of the day, the assigning chores part is still for the authorities of the household. So, you're in this adult-like role, but you're still not the adult of the house. Like, you're still a kid at the end of the day, even if you have this adult-like role. Like, you have this adult-like role, but you still better act like a kid type of shit. It's very fucking confusing. Jesus Christ. Activities are not age appropriate, and the child may struggle to complete them for obvious reasons. Doing these activities leaves the child with little or no time to engage in normal childhood, play, school, sleep, etc. You already know the logistics. Alright, so now that we know what those two types of parentification is in more detail, let's get into how it all crinkle crackle manifest with this character. Alright. So the trauma of parentification was manifesting in this character in multitudes of ways. I'm talking so many. But there were moments in like the show/book where it was pointed out. And it all started right at the beginning with the Hunter exam. Let's go back to chapter 36. That's where it all began, where Illumi states that he was originally in the hunter exam just for a job. So I'm just here to get a license for a job that I have. I had no clue that my younger brother, aka the hire that ran away, ended up here. All I knew last time I checked was that this kid was out here being Dora the Explorer. We all know what happened. We were searching. We kind of stopped searching for a little bit. And Lord and behold, you're here while I'm trying to get a license. We thought you would come back home. Never mind, your ass is here instead. Right? That's kind of what happened. The whole thing. I'm trying to put a picture in y'all's head. So, his mom, like Illumi and Killua's mom, right, essentially asked Illumi to check on Killua whenever you get the chance, or if you end up bumping into him. Because we know, again, his itty-bitty body's somewhere. We just don't know where. He's on the run again. We don't know where this kid went. Go find your brother. Go see if he's okay. And bring him back. More likely. It's like, go bring him back. But it wasn't said in a calm manner. We'll get into a little bit as to why that is. Right? So go check over. Bring him back. What the hell? You know? Got a 12-year-old on the loose. Now this surface level is very reasonable, right? On the surface, this appears normal. This just seems like, go get your brother. I'm being a concerned mom, which, I mean, is true. Again, I'm not going to deny that for Kikyo at all. It's like, just seems like a concerned mom. However, and I do mean however. Yep, I got to ruin it. I'm sorry. This, on top of the anxiety of just like losing a 12-year-old, on top of just the power keg that BPD tends to bring, let's just say that anxiety may ignite a lot of symptoms, especially, once again, if it's unregulated. That's where things really start to hit the fan. I must indicate here, unregulated. Like, no amount of regulation at all. You're gonna see the worst of the worst. You just are. And if that anxiety is just not alleviated, again, emotional response, very explosive. Demonstrating once again, kind of the role reversal of a parent relying on their children for emotional comfort. In this case, with the oldest being like, what? Calm down. I will find him. Eventually. Like, I'll find him, and once I do, I'll bring him back. Right? Just kind of shh. Because now you're igniting all kinds of emotional triggers within my nervous system. Again, physiological as well as psychological. It's like, now you're hurting me. I can't have that. Whatever it takes to stop you from, and as we know with this woman especially, it's like, she screams. So that in and of itself is like, my body's reacting in ways that I don't want to, right? Like, that's what's happening with this character. My body's just igniting all kinds of issues. No, ma'am. I gotta go. I gotta go and fix this shit. Typical me. So again, causing the child to become the caretaker and suppresses their own needs, which can later develop into depression. Speaking from personal experience as well, it's, again, not fun. It is not the vibe at all. So, another example is in this chapter specifically, when Illumi attempted to remind Killua of his familial responsibilities, through a combination of projection as well as manipulation in the monologue. I'm not going to deny that. That's exactly what it was. Okay? So this behavior is, of course, maladaptive, meaning it's not healthy. We all know that. That's obvious. But it also demonstrates a negative consequence of parentification because when a child experiences trauma, in this case, adult children too, I'm not, avoiding anybody in this case. I'm bringing adult children on a platter. Experiences trauma, they learn to suppress their pain for so long that it manifests as negative emotions such as anger. Anger that's been boiling inside your body for so long, and you have no idea how to regulate it. So now you're projecting that anger onto, in this case, your sibling. I've done that. I'll admit my sins. I've done that. I've later have to realize it's not my sibling's fault. And yes, in my case, it's my parents partially, but it was also like outside circumstances as well. In this case, for like this specific character, elders of the house, not knowing how to regulate their own trauma and their own mental illnesses, and now it's just passing down to the kids. So kind of outside, environmental things as well, but more often than not, now we're talking personally the parents' fault. If we gonna be for real. Like, anger towards the parents is more so of a valid response. But, with the mixture of anger towards siblings, that might also be heavily due to the triangulation, again, that happens within narcissistic environments. So now instead of, all the blame's going to be on me, I need to make sure that that never happens. So why don't I just make them fight each other instead? Right? So like sibling rivalry, that's triangulation for this household. So like think of like, I don't agree with my brother this one time, I'm gonna fight or whatever. And then like your parents normally step in and be like, hey, don't fight your brother, with more so emotionally unstable / narcissistic, other types of indications of, that person not being emotionally healthy as a parent. When they see their children fighting, it's fun. It's like, yes, finally, the attention is away from me. And then that's where the problems start arising. So now we're pointing the fingers at each other, being like, well, you're to blame. Well, you're to blame. Add on top of that of a scapegoat where most of the siblings can now point one finger at this poor child that had little to nothing to do with this shit either. It is a whole mess, and the whole reason for all of this happening is so that the narcissist can still feed the supply of their issues and never have their problems be acknowledged, because God forbid you put a mirror back at someone with NPD. That shit will really power the keg and hit the fan, because then they're gonna realize that, wow, this illness is due to like my own insecurities, but I'm never going to look into that, so I'm just gonna make sure it's everybody else's fucking problem. It is a mess and a half. I hate it. I despise it so much. Additionally, Illumi explains clearly that is not the way Dad and I molded you, or put it in another way, raised you. Weird sentence, right? Let's talk more about it. As well as the parentification, there was simmering resentment as well, which we've already clearly seen with, again, the projection and manipulation. Clearly, there's resentment within this character. Because of the flat tone, other people can't see it. I did. This character's clearly not okay with what's going on, but things like dissociation and other types of trauma responses make it seem like, and flat tone, make it seem like this character's really mellow with this situation. They're not. I see through that shit. They're not. So not okay. Right? So parentification was also evident, very much so evident, in the lessons that Illumi taught Killua as well. And one of the main reasons being never to face a superior opponent. That was the main lesson, right? Never face a superior opponent. This was the lesson that was just hammered into Killua's head. Technically, quite literally, if you count the needle. And while it was meant to protect the youngster at first, I get where it's coming from, right? It also meant that Killua cannot truly challenge himself, which humans need to do in order to develop individuality. Right? You could take it in a literal way. It's like, literally don't physically fight nobody, but it also means, anybody that you view as like, oh my God, this person's like better than me or whatever. It's like, I can never face them, right? I can never face somebody who, for example, bullies me. I can never face, like, just all kinds of things in which at the end of the day, you kind of do have to face somebody that's superior than you, right? Like, let's translate this into the real world. It's like, what if you have like a boss that treats you horribly? What if you have like, just so many situations in which you have to stand up for yourself? Like, on one hand, you want to protect your younger siblings. So I get where this is coming from. I get it. But you cannot protect your siblings from everything in the world. Sometimes they need to get hurt to learn lessons. They can't do that if you keep smothering and kind of coddling them. That's the main thing. Even I had to learn, where it's just like, you know what? At first it'd be like, never face a superior opponent. But eventually you're gonna have to face those monsters. You're gonna have to face people that are quote unquote superior. And eventually what you really learn is that there is nobody superior than you. Motherfucker, we both bleed the same. But it takes a while to learn that, because again, we talked about this with the parentification in general, specifically for this character as well as parentification in general. You learn to kind of just deal with oppression in a way, kind of just fawn, kind of just, it'll be fine if I just avoid it long enough. Like, I don't need to face it. I don't need to stand up for myself, because if I try to, it's like everything would just hit the fan, and God forbid for that. So it's like my response is just fawning, consistent fawning. Eventually you learn that that's not helping. It's not. But it takes a while to learn that, and it really takes a while if you're kind of still in the same thing that traumatized you. Like, you can kind of have to get out of your situation first, more than anything. So hopefully later on, with the chapters, we kind of see that. But continuing onward, one of the main roles of enablers especially is to maintain, again, the family appearance, which we've already discussed beforehand. So by keeping the more unpleasant parts hidden from everybody else and appeasing the family. So the trauma is then illustrated once more when Illumi puts Killua, quote unquote, back in his place by preventing him from having friends or allowing outsiders to eventually investigate and figure out that there's dysfunction in the house, right? And again, he doesn't even tell what is soon to be his fiance about everything and anything. They're kind of just like talking, but the conversations, like in the beginning of the Hunter exam, before we got into the election arc, very surface level. It's like, yeah, he's gonna go into like the lion's den with Gun and be like, okay, what do you mean by that? Right? As somebody who's like kind of close. It's like, what do you mean by that? Because it's like, he doesn't know yet. He doesn't really say like the details. Yeah, it's very surface level of a conversation. And then reiterates his parentification by essentially telling Killua, you'll keep doing what you've always done, the job Dad and I trained you to do. Again, another unusual sentence. But it clearly demonstrates again that clear emotional parentification that we've already discussed, in which a child acts as a surrogate spouse. So again, kind of replacing, the mom. Because when you really sit and think about that sentence, it's weird as fuck. Because that sentence is supposed to be the way Dad and Mom raised you, right? That's a normal sentence that people have. But it's Dad and I, as if Mom is cut out from the picture. Huh? It's especially weird considering that their mom is still alive. What the heck is happening? Weird shit. That's what. So again, taking on the role that Silva's wife, also known as the mother of all his children, should have. 10th time I want to choke this man. Jesus Christ of Nazareth. We're going to continue. This, of course, carries over into the election arc, as Illumi introduces the family scapegoat, Alika. Remember? Scapegoat? Back into play. Alika. She gets introduced. Hello. So the need to get rid of her in chapter 320 starts to become more clear. The main the main thing that everybody, highlights is like, why the fuck do you feel the need to get rid of your younger sibling? We'll get into the mentality of all this right about now, actually. Yes, This is also due to parentification. You'll see. So as scapegoats are shown to be the problem in the family, as we talked about when it comes to the dysfunctional family roles, right? We've talked about it before in that episode. Scapegoats, problem of the family, quote unquote. I'm putting in quotations because they're not really the problem. The problem is whatever issue that the parents and or elders in the family in general are dealing with. But they don't want their problems to be highlighted. So we got to deflect. We got to put the blame on somebody else. The person who seems to be the quote unquote problem. The person who, again, scapegoats reflect all the issues of the family, right? Because they're responding to the trauma in a different way. Even Alika, she admitted within the election arc at one time, it's like, would things get better if I just go away? Which is a clear symptom of being a scapegoat, noticing it's like, is it me that's the problem? But it's like, no, baby, it's not you. It is your dad. But your dad can't deal with his own shit in a healthy fucking way. So of course he has to blame it on his kids. I'm upset again. Jesus. I'm upset again. Justifiably so. God, I hate Silva with a passion. Baby girl did not deserve that. She did not. Again, scapegoats are trying to be the quote unquote problem of the family, but they're not actually the problem. We know that. The family doesn't know that because triangulation. Everybody's out here scrappling and fighting each other. It's a mess. Probably messier than Kendrick and Drake's beef. It's a disaster. Yes, I had to apply another pop culture thing. Anyways, back to the main point. It's a mess and a half. And Illumi's role is a mix of a caretaker and hero. Stay with me. He adopts the mindset of eliminating the quote-unquote problem in order to alleviate some of the chaos within the home. Because as you would imagine, again, when you have someone with MPD sort of igniting, right? Their issues start really rising up. And we're going to talk later on a little bit into narcissistic rage. Mix that in with the anxieties of someone with BPD, right? Because now you have someone with MPD. They're getting upset. Now this person with BPD, their worries and anxieties are shooting through the fucking roof. Now they're ignited. Now you got two people with severe mental illnesses kind of igniting and feeding into each other's issues. You got this weird cycle going on. Like, think again back to when we talked about attachment styles, right? But we're not dealing with attachment styles. Now we're dealing with legit mental illnesses, right? So like, think in this way of someone of the anxious avoidant circle. Think of that, but like 10 times worse. That's essentially what's going on. It's a mess. It's like you got that circle kind of just whoo, 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 like a motherfucking tornado. And it's just like, Jesus Christ, what the hell? It's like a tornado, except if you light that tornado on fire, and now it's just all around the house. It's like, oh my God. Things are getting chaotic. Grandpa's not happy either. Grandpa's probably like, see, I should have listened to my wife, but I wanted to trust you, the hire of the house for some reason. I wanted to trust that my son would pick, a right wife, but it's like, she's hitting the fucking fan. Little do you know, you're also enabling your son's behavior. It's like, it's mostly because of your son, like igniting the BPD. And now it's like, rush, fume, all over the house. Now his grandpa's mad. We don't know where the hell great grandpa, or like great. There's so many greats for Maha, but it's like, we don't know where great grandpa went. I'm just going to put one great, even though there's multiple. We have no idea where that old man went. We don't know. It's like one old man's mad because it's like, look at all this shit. I told you I don't like that one. And it's like, your son's not a good person either. And it's like, we know why. Like, I feel like it's like, oh, emotional neglect is just normal in this house. No wonder your child ended up the way that he is. But you know what? We'll talk about that when we get into Silva's analysis later. So it's like the oldest kid is like, oh my God, what the hell is happening? Clearly, my job is to regulate the emotions of these two fuckers. That character won't say it in that way, but I will. These two fuckers, So
So it's like, how can I alleviate this? Well, it seems to be that the quote-unquote problem child, it's like, maybe they're to blame. Maybe I gotta eliminate the problem so that this fucking tornado on fire stops happening. It's a mess. So it's like, it's not unreasonable to be like, I gotta alleviate the chaos somehow. But again, going back to the experiments, the first step actually wasn't to kill Alaka at all, right? It was kind of just like appease Killua and once again kind of get him back in his position of being the golden child, because without the golden child, right, without anybody to feed like the narcissistic supply, they're out of the fucking keg and now there's a tornado on fire. There's nobody to appease his positivity. Now his ass is insecure, and when narcissist is insecure again, shit hits the fan. It's like there's nobody appeasing him. Me as the oldest kid, I can't do that shit. So I gotta get the higher back in his position so that everything can be stable again. You see how it's a mess? So messy. So it's like he's out here, with the scapegoat. Now I gotta try a way to bring them both back. But if that doesn't work, right, and he makes this deadly wish, I have no choice but to kill this little girl and to figure something else out. Do you see now how, like, if you were in the same position, you would also lose your fucking mind? Do you see how now shit's a mess? Sometimes you gotta lay it flat out on the table. Now it's a mess, and now you know why it's a mess. So again, now that we know the type of chaos we're dealing with, in chapter 322, right? In order to protect people, specifically his family, from Killua's potential deadly dangerous wish, we talked about this, he must find some way to control the situation. We talked about it. As this may have caused more arguments, again, between the elders behind the scenes. All's been discussed. We know that in full summary. Killua mentioned in chapter 326 that he is somewhat aware, although not in grand detail, like it's very sparse. Like he doesn't put the puzzle pieces together, but he knows that there's something off, at least, about the dynamic between the oldest kid, aka his oldest sibling, and his dad. It's a give and take, right? But again, the give and take, as I've mentioned, is very linear. It's more so taking on Silva's end and constantly giving on this end to appease. That's what's happening. It's less of a circle, more of a line. It's looking a mess. But again, I'm not going to blame the 12-year-old for not knowing that. Why would he? All of these kids are put into crazy positions they do not need to be in. God help them all. So again, he's aware that something is off, but he doesn't really process it until he's out of the house, which that tends to be the case for most of these kids. They don't really start to process the trauma that they were actually involved in until they leave the environment, which I mean, like, obviously. Okay? So because he's the golden child as well, I don't think he understands, like Killua as the golden child, not blaming him at all. Okay? But as the golden child, your opinion about your siblings does get skewed. And this is mostly because your parents also kind of shield you in a way, right? So they kind of shield you. They put you on this pedestal up high. So now you're kind of above your siblings in a way. You're no longer relatable to your siblings. There's no way to connect to you anymore, right? You're kind of just all the way up there and your siblings are down here. And it's just like, wow, what the fuck? That's not it. It just seems like everything's given to you, but it's like, again, it's only to appease, in this case, someone's NPD and their supply of attention. Because again, for most of the cluster Bs, it's an insecurity/attention disorder. Not attention like with ADHD. I mean like attention as in wanting other people's attention kind of thing. Mix that in with like insecurity. That's the most common thing that you're going to get from all the cluster bees. Disastrous. Again, so not blaming the golden child for being in that position of becoming, the new parent's narcissistic supply, but that's what happened. That's all they're there for. Just feeding into all the positive projections that this parent could have, right? To be like, either I could be great or I was great, right? It's never present tense, by the way. It's always past tense. Terrible shit. God help them. Okay? Views on his father are hella skewed because it's like to him, to a kid, it's just like, hey, and again, we kind of talked about this before. It's like, hey, he's treating me okay. It's like, yeah, you're the golden child. That's why he's treating you okay. He doesn't understand that's not genuine love. That's conditional love in order to control him and to keep him, again, as narcissistic supply for Sylvia. That's kind of the problem. He doesn't realize this again until he's like completely out of the house. Like by the end of the election arc is when we start seeing that realization kind of kick in, and then we'll kind of just sit and process and be like, oh, what the fuck? Yeah, it's a mess. And we're probably going to see that, develop and grow over time. So hopefully we do get to see that for Killua, because I believe that he, as well as his siblings, definitely deserve further character development. I want to see where this goes, Now, one of the effects of parentification was also shown by Illumi, showing a complete disregard for himself. Complete disregard. We saw it, especially when I broke it down in the mental health aspect for this character, so I'm not going to go into it again, but complete disregard for himself for when he was exposed for Killua's wish, right? Which also highlighted the suicidal ideation. Now, it's especially evident when he says stuff like, even if rule number 5 does not apply to Killua, I'm willing to die to save the rest of my family. Along with another thing that I'll add, right? The whole even if I die, at least Killua would keep me in my mind, because I don't want to be forgotten. I don't want to be lost. Kind of like that, a song by No Name. I'll put it somewhere in my podcast, or maybe in my Twitter. I don't know, but it's a really good song. But it's I don't want to be forgotten. I don't want all my efforts to be in vain, because it's to find out I did all this shit for nothing, which sadly, technically, yes, you did. It's a nightmare. It's what? Huh? Does the person that I basically raise even love me? And the answer, for honestly these siblings is, yes, I love you, but it's also very complicated. And again, those complications were brought in because, once again, the elders of the household do not know how to deal with their own shit. So all the shit just bled over to the children. And now the children don't know how to deal with nothing. It's honestly, truly sad. It is. So as the elder sibling, Illumi then makes the attempt to reason with Killua by stating, but hey, if you let me manage the two of you, the two of you as siblings, then I can guarantee at least minimal freedom, at least. I don't think he's talking about just himself. Again, we're in the Zoldyck household that's controlled by Silva. Silva wants high control within the family. It's an authoritarian household. So it's maybe I can make a deal with Dad and see if he'll allow you to do a couple of things. Maybe, right? I can soften the deal. It's I don't know if you can. Because again, As narcissistic rage can be extremely detrimental to the relationship, as I've clearly indicated before, remember, tornado on fire. And we talked about this kind of with like Silva's, lockdown rules, put it simply. What normal parent do you know has fucking lockdown rules when they're angry? None? Exactly. Fucking exactly. Exactly. Can't do shit in that house. So again, Illumi's doing this so that the chaos in their house, remember, tornado on fire, can be finally calmed down and restored, or whatever calmness they have, which is not really calmness, it's just the calm before the storm once again. So he tried to control the situation one last time by saying, hey, know your place. You gotta go back to being the golden child so that dad can have his positive supply and feed whatever fantasies that he has so he doesn't end up being a tornado on fire again. And him being a tornado on fire ignites mom, right? It's like there's the tornado already happening. And with mom, it's a tornado on fire. Please go back so that shit in this house can go normal and I can stop having my nervous system completely ignited over and over and over again. Shit's hurting me mentally. That's not what was said, but it might as well have been. It might as well have been, because that's exactly what's happening. Internally, we went to Illumi's thoughts, right? So this is what this character thought. It's like, maybe if I just use my powers and turn this little boy into a puppet, he can just go back. I could control everything in the situation, so my family could be so-called perfect, aka regulated, so I don't gotta deal with their shit no more. That's not what was said, but again, might as well have been. So there's that. But it was a fleeting thought. It's a thought that never went through, and I think that's what a lot of people miss, right? When it comes to this character, because they think that that thought was permanent. It's not. It never shows up again. It was in the moment of like this high stressful situation that now I clearly shown, like I laid it on the table. It's like, do you see how stressful this situation is? You too will probably be thinking of all kinds of things to just shut your family the fuck up. Disastrous. Overall, this character demonstrated parentification, which proved to be extremely damaging, which we already know. So the following section next time, we're going to look into how Illumi can personally recover from all of his trauma and redeem himself as a character. And when I mean redeem, I don't mean in the traditional sense, because Hunter x Hunter is not a traditional hero kind of story. That's literally not its formatting. So we're going to talk about how it's done in, their own little way. We're going to do a little twist to what like redemption means and all this other stuff. It's going to be fun. It's going to be the last episode too. So like, let's all pat, clap, do whatever, congratulate ourselves, because this is the second to last episode. Wow. Again, it took a lot of time making this series, doing research on literally everything for this character, from analyzing the character's behavior, connecting it back to actual traumas and actual things, just kind of connecting all kinds of things together, putting the research together. It took long, but it was a beautiful, beautiful process, and I'm so glad to be doing it again for the next character that I'm going to analyze. I'm going to see you guys next time. But again, it has been a really beautiful journey thus far.